All right, so I'm Aaron Ritter and I am Limitless Outdoors, and I get to talk to you all today about the mindset of a successful hunter and what that means to me. And we'll get into that more over the next few minutes. But I want, when you walk away from this time period that we have today, whether we go for 30 minutes or 40, 45 minutes, or we talk after I spend this time with you, please walk away from this seminar with your own mindset. So just because I hunt a certain way or because I think a certain way towards hunting, that doesn't mean that that's how you should think. Or when you walk out of this room, you say, wow, this one-legged guy up in the front of the room told me that this is really what I need to do, or this is what his thought process is, and so that's what I should go do. We might think completely different about our hunting and our hunting experiences, but what I hope you leave this room with today is a thought process that will make your hunt the best that it can be. And it might even impact other areas of your life, not just your hunt. So throughout my show, I have some slides, and I'm not going to bore you with PowerPoints today. I'm going to bore you with my voice. But as we're rolling through, I'm just going to randomly have my logo up in the background just to give you something to look at other than me, because the handsome part of my family is sitting right there next to my mother. So I'm going to ask you the question today, are you a hunter or do you like to hunt? Because for me, there is a significant difference. But before we really get into the nuts and bolts of what Aaron thinks is the difference between being a hunter and liking to hunt, I want to talk a little bit about history and what's happening here today with me and my family. So the last time I was at the Portland Outdoor Show was in February of 1991. I grew up across the river in Washougal, Washington. I came to the show the first time, we think it was when I was 6 years old, so 1979, February-ish of 1979, I would have been 6 years old, and that's the first time my father brought me across the river to attend this show. There was a lot of buildup on that event. My grandfather was alive then. I'm a third-generation hunter, probably longer, but for the history that I know of our family, I'm a third-generation hunter, at least that's how I like to say it. And we spent a lot of time with my father's father and his mother, Grandpa Jack. And so a couple of weeks before the show, I'm sitting on Grandpa's lap, and we know that we're coming over to the show. We know that there's a fish pond, and we know that Aaron is going to get to fish in the pond. So there was a lot of chit-chat between myself and Grandpa Jack on coming over here and fishing. And came over, did some fishing, and then for the years to follow, as long as I was at that age to fish the pond, we would hit that build-up stage knowing that the show was coming. I'd be back in Grandpa's lap, and we'd be talking about the fishing that we had done the year before at the show, what we caught, seeing the lunkers that were in that pond, and what we were going to do different to try to catch one of those lunkers so that I could be one of those lucky kids that walked away with a 3, 4, 5 pound trout. That's the mindset of a successful hunter, right? So we fast forward a little bit. From about 6 years old till I was 18, I came to this show every single year with my father. In July of 91, on my mother's birthday, I shipped off for the Navy. And I haven't been back to this show with my father since. So this year wasn't planned. My father celebrated his 79th birthday this week. My mother and father celebrated their 51st anniversary this week. That is the reason why I came home. In that planning process, we realized that the Portland Sportsmen show was taking place, and everything just fell into place. So I reached out to the O'Laughlin group, and I spoke with Terry, and I told him a little bit about who I was, and he immediately says, how many days can you come and speak, and what do you want to talk about? And this is what I want you to talk about. So here I am. So after 32 years, my mother and my father are sitting in this room. And how special is that for us? I grew up in an area, thank you very much. I grew up in an area, most of us in here grew up in an era when there was no such thing as YouTube, there was no such thing as Instagram or Facebook. A lot of us, this gentleman right here, this gentleman over here, my father, me, there was a time frame when there was no such thing as DVDs or VHS tapes. If you wanted to hear any wisdom, any advice from your outdoor idol or celebrity, whatever you want to call them, you had to read it in a magazine, buy their book, or come to a show like the Portland Sportsmen show and go to a seminar and listen to them talk and then shake their hand when they were done. That was the only way you were able to interact with your outdoor idols. At that point in time, by the time I left in 1991, one of those idols for me was Dwight Schrute. Does anybody in here remember Dwight Schrute? Amazing archer, right? Larry D. Jones. My father and I, we watched Larry D. Jones here. We watched Dwight Schrute here. Fishing the Northwest was huge in the 80s, right? Everybody wanted to come and listen to a seminar about fishing the Northwest and how they would hook and land those massive tires on camera without us seeing those massive tires on camera. It was a great time, right? So fast forward 32 years, I get to come home a little emotional with these two people and celebrate them, and they get to see their son out here talking with all of you, and I get to speak today and tomorrow. So that's the history that I wanted to share with you, something special that was happening today. So 10 minutes in, we're going to get back into what you all came here to listen about. So are you a hunter or do you like to hunt? What does that mean to Aaron Ritter? When you're preparing for deer camp, have you spent the entire year poring over an area that you intend to harvest an animal in? When you pack your gear and you're heading to your location, whether it's for a morning or a day or a weekend or a week, is the thought process in your head, I am harvesting today? Or are you calling your buddy on the phone or sending him a text message as you're driving towards camp and you say, I hope one of us gets lucky this week? So see, to me, that's the difference. I'm a hunter. When I go someplace, regardless of the state, and I hunt nationwide, when I go to a state, I have researched that state. I have studied that state, and I'll show you an image here in a little bit of an area that was 80 yards wide and 250 yards long, and I studied that on 3 different map engines for 9 months before I went and hunted it. That is what being a hunter is to me. Now, some of you might be here and say, hey, I really look forward to going to camp and drinking a beer, playing some cards, going out and hunting for a few hours and having a good time with my friends. And I'm a hunter. That's awesome. I'm not going to argue with you. I will tell you from my point of view, you like to hunt. I was, my last duty station in the Navy was Southern Maryland. And there was a gentleman a couple of miles down the road from me. His name is Steve, and I fondly refer to Steve as Hippie Steve. Hippie Steve was in his mid-ish 60s. He was born and raised in Southern Maryland, and that guy was a hunting fool. He did not have a lot, but he would give you anything that he had if you needed it. He was just an incredible man. I was standing in his front yard with a father and son and Steve and I. Steve was a huge waterfowl guy. And they were talking duck hunting. And I'm not a duck hunter. I don't even like to hunt ducks. But we're standing there talking, and through the conversation, this teenage boy says, yeah, I'm a duck hunter. I love hunting ducks. I'm a duck hunter. And Steve looked at him, and he said, son, no offense. I've been hunting ducks for 55 years. You're 15 years old. I'm a duck hunter. You like to hunt ducks. You haven't spent enough time sitting in the blind, setting deeks, and blowing a call. You don't have the experience yet. It's no offense, but you like to hunt ducks. I'm a duck hunter. Give it 15, 20 years, and you'll be a duck hunter. And that's really where that's really where that mentality, that idea really started falling into place inside my head as I'm listening to Hippie Steve talk to this 15-year-old boy about what it takes, what's the difference between a 65 or 67-year-old man that's been hunting ducks since he was 7 or 8 years old, and it's one of his passions, compared to a 15-year-old boy that does it when he's not out chasing his girlfriend or playing football. That's a duck hunter rather than liking to hunt ducks. So what is it about the mindset of a successful hunter? What else is it about me that I can stand here for a period of time and try to impress upon you what gives me the power of my mindset? And there we go. My background is Navy Special Operations. I served in the Navy for 28 total years. And a large majority of that time frame I spent as an explosive ordnance disposal technician, and I retired as a chief master tech. In 2012, I came home from Iraq and I had a very traumatic incident on a Harley Davidson. And through that incident, I came off of my motorcycle and I was flying through the air and my leg hit a tree and it ripped it off. I was 100 meters apart from my leg. I was 39 years old. And at that point in my life, I had accomplished pretty much everything I had ever wanted to do, but I had done it on 2 legs. And I'm laying there in the dark, I'm bleeding out, and I'm watching a buddy of mine run up to me, and he's ripping his belt off of his waist to put on a hasty tourniquet. And I looked him in the face and I asked him, say, Chris, is it really gone? And he looked at me, he says, yeah, Aaron, it's really gone. And that moment, that very moment in my life was the first time I ever gave up. I told him, just let me go. Just let it go, man. Because right then, I didn't know anything other than life on 2 legs. My mindset was tied to 2 natural legs. And he said no, he's like, no way, as he's cinching that belt down onto my right thigh. When he did that, my mind did another 180, and I knew at that moment that I was going to live my life better than I ever had on 2 legs. So that year, that was February 11th of 2012. It was, this is some irony, that was the weekend of my mother and father's 40th wedding anniversary. I called my dad on the phone as I'm laying there in the dark in a pool of my own blood. And I said, Dad, I need you to sit down. I don't know if I'm going to make it through this one. Now, please bear in mind, I had traveled the world, combat tours. I cut wires and took explosives apart, IEDs, suicide vests, bombs. That's what I did for a living. And I came home, my mom thought that I was safe, and I called my dad on the phone and said, I don't think I'm going to make it through this one. I had a lot of people in my life tell me that I was not going to accomplish the things that I wanted to do. I was an E6 in the Navy. I wanted to be a chief petty officer. That same year, I became a chief petty officer. I was told that I would never be on an EOD platoon again in my life, being deployable and able to go to war. I recertified as a full-up deployable asset, and when I returned to a team, I returned to a team as an SF chief in the Navy. I didn't run my first marathon until after I had lost my leg, and I have now ran multiple marathons, 50Ks, and my personal record for distance is a 60-kilometer road race. What else have I done? I hunt my face off. That's really what I do. I retired almost 2 years ago, and archery is one of the tools that I use to propel myself forward in life mentally and physically. And through that process, I discovered saddle hunting, tree saddle hunting. Anybody in here never heard of tree saddle hunting? Never heard of it, right? Well, tomorrow at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm going to teach you all about saddle hunting. Saddle hunting is an elevated style of hunting where you're climbing trees with a stick and it's a hammock for your butt. And you're hanging up in the tree in ropes, and I can shoot 360 degrees around a tree. It is so much fun. It's the most fun you're going to have hunting unless you're about 10 or 15 yards staring a bull in the face in September.
How does that compare to a normal tree stand?
It's light, it's mobile, and I can climb any tree in the forest.
I just learned a little bit about it last year, and I just sit in tree stands, but it's...
We'll talk after my seminar today, and if you're around tomorrow, come in at 4 o'clock, and I'm going to talk about it in depth. But if not, if you're not here tomorrow, talk to me after the seminar, and we'll connect. Okay. So that mindset. One of the things that I took from the Navy, from my military background and working with Army SF, is a principle that we call the 60-30-10 principle. 60% training and tactics, 30% tools and equipment or technology, and 10% luck. That's what I apply to almost everything in my life. But the foundation of that is the 60%. Your training and your tactics is imperative to your success. You can apply that to anything in your life, but I apply it directly to my hunting world. When I was 6 or 7 years old, my father did something with me that most fathers probably do not do with their children when they're bringing them up into the hunting world or industry. We sat in the living room with an outdoor show on, with my shotgun or my rifle in my hand, and my dad walked me through kill shots with those animals. As the animal would meander through the screen, my dad would say, wait, when are we going to shoot? Okay, shoot now. And of course, obviously, there was a whole lot of gun safety involved with that process. That was key in my household, or our household. But that's one of the things that my father did with me at an extremely young age. That's part of that 60%. It doesn't matter when you start. You could start hunting at 6, you could start hunting at 16, you could start hunting at 60. But what you do with that 60% of training and tactics is going to directly influence your success when you're out in the field. Tools and technology. How well do you know your tools and or your technology? Technology is a massive portion of our success. Randy was in here talking, and I don't know if everybody was in here when he brought it up, but he started talking about his cell phone and all the apps that he has on his cell phone. I have the same thing. In fact, right before I flew out here, I was trying to get a new phone. We were having problems with it, and I kind of went into a little bit of a panic. And I didn't realize how much of my life was wrapped up around that cell phone when I thought I might have to travel out here without one. And it's odd because I've had multiple combat deployments where we went into theater without personal cell phones. And it's a wonderful feeling to cut that thing out of your life for a while. But the technology of it is a huge benefit as a hunter. Mapping systems. If you're not studying maps for your hunts, you're hindering your success if your success is tied around a harvest and or a particular deer and or class of animal. So on the East Coast, which is where I live, guys are really tied into specific deer. They have cameras everywhere. They name their deer. It's really not what I'm into. I've never been that way. And I don't have anything against people that do that. It's a huge part of the hunting industry right now, naming your deer and choosing and chasing that one single deer. But that technology is tied to a portion of your success if that is the direction that you want to go. And 10% luck. How does luck play into that? No matter what you do to prepare for a hunt, no matter how well you study and train and practice, no matter how many types of technology you employ into your planning and execution, no matter what type of camo you wear, whether you wear scent lock or scent free, no matter what soaps you wear, no matter what kind of scents, cover-up scents you use, or your calls, or how good you are with your calls, that animal and Mother Nature has a vote. In the military, we called it the enemy has a vote. No plan survives first contact. So when you're out hunting, that deer and Mother Nature, we're going to say Mother Nature as in weather and wind, we cannot defeat the wind, right? So there is that 10% where no matter how perfect you execute your hunt, the animal and Mother Nature can always have an impact on that, and that's the 10% of luck. Those two things have to play into your success as well, and it doesn't happen every single time. But when it does happen, all of the legwork that you put into your hunt prior to that moment pays off big. And you walk away with a full tag and a full heart. And for something like my father, I get to call him on the phone as I'm processing my animal out in the field and share the story with him, sometimes on Facebook video, or sometimes I just have him on speaker as I'm processing an animal out in the field. That's where that whole moment comes together. And that's really based off of my 60-30-10 principle. So I'm going to tell you a story about how I really employed it. So growing up, Washougal, Washington, right across the river. State resident until 2 years ago. I was raised to fill a tag. And in Washington, any Washington residents in here? Okay, couple. In Washington, if you're a bow hunter, you buy a license for bow hunting, or for rifle hunting, or for a muzzleloader. You're not buying a license that spans September to January like you can in Maryland. You buy a license for that particular season, and then you hunt during that season. And what's your favorite style of? Are you a bow hunter or a rifle hunter? Bow. So how long is your season? For 10 days. You have 10 days to fill that tag. What about deer?
Maybe a little longer, 2 weeks.
2 weeks. In the state of Maryland, I can buy my license and I start hunting on the Friday after Labor Day weekend, and I can hunt until January 31st. And it covers every weapon system that is legal, every weapon season in Maryland, and I can harvest multiple deer. When I was assigned to Southern Maryland, and 2018 was my first full season, I could harvest unlimited antlerless deer in Region B in Southern Maryland. I harvested 14 whitetail that year. I tested 7 different loads in a new muzzle loader. And when I say tested those loads, I'm not talking about going to the flat range and papering 7 different loads. I put 7 different loads and 7 different bullets into animals. It's amazing. But growing up here, I didn't pass on an animal. My father didn't pass on an animal. If a legal deer walked out and presented an epical shot, it didn't matter if it was a spike or a record book buck, you filled your tag. It might be, if you passed on that spike blacktail, it might be 2 or 3 seasons before you had another shot opportunity on a deer. The boys out on the East Coast, they're not that way. Let it grow. I want a trophy. Let it grow. Why did you shoot that spike? Well, because it's my spike. And remember what I said when I kicked this thing off? This seminar is in the world according to Aaron Ritter. Because you might be happy with a spike. I'm perfectly happy with an antlerless deer. I think they're all trophies. Really depends on what your hunt is about. This last year was the first time I ever went trophy hunting. Prior to 2022, I filled my freezer. Last year really caught my wife off guard. We've been together for 4 years, and during that 4-year time frame, she had never experienced me as a trophy hunter. I filled the freezer. I do not have a single shoulder mount hanging on my wall. It was never a priority to me. I have some Euros, but I don't have a single shoulder mount hanging on my wall. That was not part of that wasn't my end state, my end goal as a hunter, was to have trophies hanging on the wall. I wanted to fill my freezer. I enjoyed the social aspect of hunting. After I lost my leg and after I came home from some combat, I found recovery in solitude in hunting by myself and through archery. That became my focus for several years. I'll talk about that more at the end of the seminar. As the years transitioned over there on the East Coast, I decided that maybe it was about time Aaron pursued a whitetail deer that was, in my opinion, worthy of a shoulder mount. So in 2022, I made that my goal. I was going to harvest a really, really nice quality deer. So how did I do that? I had hunted Nebraska in 2021. It was on a whim. I had a gentleman call me on the phone that I'd interacted with on social media, and he invited me to go hunt Nebraska with a couple of other guys that happened to be big Badlands fans. Obviously, I'm a Badlands fan. And so I said, yeah, that sounds great. I've never hunted Nebraska before. Let's do this. I did not know where we were going. Where we were staying was an old rundown farmhouse. They called it the Hunt Cabin. Doesn't even have an address. I was halfway to Nebraska from Maryland. I was in Virginia Beach. From Virginia Beach, I was halfway to Nebraska before he sent me a waypoint on where I was actually going. I had not had an opportunity to study maps. I had my tag, I had my gear, I had my tree saddle, and I had 2 tags in my pocket. I had an antlered and an antlerless tag. We went out, day 2, I shot when I say a decent 9-point whitetail, it was a basket rack, 9-point, probably 110 inches. That deer weighed every bit of 250 pounds. It was the biggest deer, body-wise, I'd ever harvested in my life. And it was so kind that it ran 70 years through the oak flats. I was in between a river and an ag field. It ran through the hardwoods and down into a 20-foot ravine. So I had that joy of, and it was just deep in mud. I couldn't even gut him there and drop the weight and get him up out of that ravine. I had to get that deer out of the ravine. It was pretty fantastic. I was really thankful that he did that for me. So anyhow, I returned from that hunt, and we knew that we were going back. And I now knew where we were hunting, and I made the decision that I wanted to shoot a big deer. And so I started preparing myself for that. This picture right here is the area that I targeted. It was near, it's roughly a mile walk from the river where I shot the 9-point the year prior. And I will say that I screwed up a shot on a really, really nice, probably about 130-inch deer that same year. It was before I harvested that 9-point. I screwed up a shot on that bigger deer, and then one of my hunting partners out there, who's become a really, really close friend of mine, I went out and I was filming him a couple of days later, and he screwed up a shot opportunity on the very same 130 class deer that I had. We have it all on video. It's fantastic. Anyhow, I knew that I was going back, and this was the area that I was going to hunt in. So the mindset of a successful hunter. I don't like to hunt. I am a hunter. So I started the 60% of my hunt, training and tactics, and I use the 30% of my mentality of tools and technology. I don't live in Nebraska. I can't scout it. I didn't use cameras. I didn't send anybody cameras. I didn't have anybody put up cameras for me. I focused on my maps. And I looked at, he said that there's my laser. I looked at the topography of this little piece of wooded creek bottom. I have agriculture here, I have agriculture here, and I have agriculture here. This red line is private. This area and this area is public. I studied this for hours upon hours, day after day for 9 months. Some of my friends, yes ma'am.
Why did you pick that particular area?
So one of the reasons why I picked it is when I looked at the maps, it looked promising to me. I called the landowner, and he told me, he said, nobody hunts, we don't see deer activity back there, nobody hunts back there.
So you knew that was where to go.
So for me, it looked fantastic to me. Did not make sense to me that there was no deer activity back there, and I didn't understand why people did not hunt it. Now there was a stand back down over here, and again, the river would have been in this direction, going up, we'll say north. It's not north, but in orientation to this photo, it was north. There's beautiful hunting there. Off in this direction, there was another ag field, and there was a big, beautiful drainage with a natural pond in it, hardwoods, bedding area. That's where the guys like to hunt. 2 of the 3 guys I hunted with last November, that's where they hunted. And they saw a lot of deer the first few days, but they didn't harvest. I focused on this little tiny piece of heaven. And to me, has anybody here ever heard the term hub? A hub. It's big on the East Coast for hill country hunters. They will look at the topography and they look to where drainages and land features, finger ridges and points come together in multiple areas, and that's a hub. That's where the mature whitetails like to cruise. They get down on the side hill elevation, and they can, especially in the rut, they play the winds just like we do, but they're moving through those side hills, and they're using the wind and the thermals to scent check for does that are in estrus up above them on higher grounds. And then all of those different avenues of escape. So we look for what's called a hub. And if I didn't have all of my marks here, you can see all of these land features that are coming together right here. I looked at that as a micro hub. There's not a ton of elevation there. It's a creek bottom. However, I knew out in the Midwest, you have these massive ag plots. And then what we would call hedgerows, they're timbered hedgerows that have scrub oaks or full-size hardwoods in them. And sometimes this is 80 yards wide right here. From, when I say 80 yards, meaning straight across the top of the creek bottom from the field edge to the field edge. It was 80 yards. It's not very wide. And the deer travel through those. They go out in the egg plots and they feed. Before corn is cut, they live in the corn. They'll come out for water and then they go straight back into the corn. They're children of the corn. That's where they live. But I looked at this as my little piece of heaven in my spot, and I knew that there were going to be deer in there. These marks here, these green marks were what I called my areas of interest in my scouting. And I had more marks in there throughout the year, but when I prepped to drive to Nebraska, I knew that I wanted to get eyes on those locations. This over here is what I found at a couple of those green marks. So when I arrived on site, the first morning of the hunt, my 2 hunting partners were gone before dark. And I stayed behind, had an extra cup of coffee, had a little breakfast, and I waited for the sun to come up. I grabbed my bow and my tree saddle, and I went out to scout/hunt in daylight. I wanted to see what my e-scouting was in real time before I actually started to hunt it. And that is what I found right on top of my green marks. 2 of my green marks, one of them had this massive rub that almost looks like a small elk rub. The tree was about this big around. It was massive. And then this rub right here, down right about here, right along the bend in the creek right here, was a scrape rub combo. So they were rubbing a tree, had a licking branch on it with a scrape right underneath it. And there's a lot of East Coast hunters that will try to tell you that deer, whitetail, will not scrape on the same tree that they rub. And I will tell you that I don't believe that because I've seen it. And I saw it right here in Nebraska. So now, 9 months of prep work, 9 months of that 60 and 30% of execution is starting to pay off right in front of me. It's all coming together. So I climb this tree right here. I'm up in that tree probably about 9 o'clock in the morning, and I get settled. Again, I'm hunting out of a tree saddle, and I watch 2 doe come from this ag field. They drop down into the creek bottom, and they come right up through this little indentation in the topography right there. They were 25, 30 yards from me. I didn't make a sound. Now, again, this is second week of November, peak of the rut in Nebraska. I'm in there 9:30 in the morning. I saw a deer on my walk in. I didn't make a sound. No calling, no rattling. I come out at noon. I go back to camp. I swap out some of my gear. I have lunch, and I tell the boys I'm going back in there. I'm hunting this creek bottom until I harvest a deer. So I climb back up in that tree. I'm back up in my tree about 2:30. I still don't make a sound. Quiet. About 4 o'clock, and I haven't seen any deer. I didn't see any deer the rest of the afternoon. About 4 o'clock, I pull out my buck grunt, and I'm not going to sit here and throw out a whole bunch of names and try to sell you on certain products. Deer calls, I'm a big fan of the Illusion system. I use the Black Rack for rattling antlers, and I really, really like their extinguisher. It's a very universal, easy to use deer call. It's a one and done deer call. You can go from a fawn bleat all the way to a fairly mature whitetail deer or deer, a buck. I'm a huge Phelps fan, big Phelps fan, and they came out with their new deer call. So I had the new beta call, which makes a incredible mature buck grunt. About 4 o'clock, I hit that beta call, waited a couple of minutes. I went through about a 30 to 45 second rattling sequence. I made 2 more buck calls, buck grunts, and then I just sat there. About 15 to 20 minutes before I lost legal hunting light, I saw my first deer right here coming up on the opposite side of the creek. And as you can see, it gets kind of dense there. There was a huge brush pile down there. I watched this buck walk behind there. I saw his back end. And I knew from his hindquarters I was going to shoot that deer. I hadn't even seen his head or his antlers yet. I knew from his hindquarters that I was going to shoot that deer. So I started picking up my bow at that point in time. When he came out this side of the brush pile, I saw the second buck walking in this direction. He was about 70, 80 yards behind the lead buck, and he was a smaller deer. When I say smaller, probably a 130 class deer. He was a good sized, he was a shootable deer. I saw the lead buck come out this way, and I had set I call it a kill box. I'm big on military terms. Called it my kill box. I had gone in, I freshened up that rub and scrape. I freshened up this scrape. I put in, back here behind me, I put in 2 more scrapes. And I had some scent wicks throughout the creek. That lead buck followed the creek bed. He came up here, crossed right here, and went broadside right here. He was 15 yards from me. Biggest whitetail deer I've ever had that close to me. Had no clue that I was there. He was looking straight up the creek, sniffing for that doe. I had some estrus scent down in there. I already had my bow in my hand. I started just a really, really nice, slow and controlled draw. I waited. He had turned his head opposite side of the creek and was looking down towards that other buck. I got halfway through my draw cycle. That deer whipped his head around, did a 180, and ran right down here and stopped. See this little brush pile? He stopped right there in between those 2 trees right along the creek bottom, broadside, looking back up the creek at me. So now I'm at full draw. I shoot a single pin sight, and I had it at 22 yards because in my mind, I was going to shoot across the creek here, maybe right down in this area, and I had a couple of really nice shooting lanes up here. I had previous deer movement. I was coming from one, they were crossing the creek, so I ranged everything. My furthest shot was 30 yards. My closest shot was 15. I put my pin at 22 yards, and I just figured I would adjust accordingly depending on what the deer was. This buck stopped right there, broadside to me, looking up the creek. He wasn't looking at me. His tail was not up. His ears were not pinned back. He was not on alert. Whatever it was when I started going to full draw that he didn't like, he didn't pinpoint me. He didn't smell me. He didn't see me. Something just, maybe he saw my shadow. I don't know what happened, but he stopped right there. I knew that I hadn't ranged it. I'm at full draw and I'm looking at him. I cleared my view. And I had shot more in 2022. That's part of my 60%. I shot more than I ever had before. I shot my bow every single day in 2022 from January 1st until the day that I went hunting. If I was on travel, I took a shot trainer with my release. It was in my carry-on or my checked baggage. And if I was in a hotel, I was using my shot trainer in my hotel. I shot every single day. I had never, ever shot 40 yards out of a tree stand in my life. All of my archery shots were 30 yards or less out of a tree stand. I put my nose onto my string, settled into my shot, put the pin where I thought that I needed it to be, and I started my shot execution. The shot broke, completely surprised me. I don't use lighted nocks. I heard it hit, and that deer did not react like he had been hit by an arrow. And my heart sunk. He ran down the creek bottom, up that way. The younger buck was back down in this area. He ran up out on that field, and I lost sight of both of them once they broke up over the edge and they went out of sight. Lost sight of both of them. And the way that deer took off running, I thought I clean missed him. Pulled out the binoculars because I do not hunt without glass, ever. And I'm looking for my arrow. And grant, I don't use lighted nocks, but I use white vanes, I use white wraps, I use white nocks so that I can try to see my arrow after a shot. Could not see my arrow. So I pulled my phone out and I texted my buddies. I said, hey, I just took a shot on a really big deer. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, well, what do we do? We've got a little bit of daylight left. Do we sit here and see what happens? Or do we get out of the tree and go look? And I'm assessing this situation, and I'm thinking, well, if I didn't get a good shot on him, I don't want to bump him, but I watched him go out into the field. I know that I can get out of the tree, and I can move quietly and slowly, surreptitiously down here in the creek bottom, and if he's laying up there on the field edge, I'm not going to bump him. So I gathered up all my stuff, let the shakes go away, because I still get buck fever. That's one of the reasons why I still like to hunt. And I got down and I walked over there and can't find my arrow. My arrow was not to be found. And I could see in the leaves where that buck had bolted, and about 10 feet from there, bright red blood. And a few yards after that, more bright red blood. It was one of the easiest tracks I've ever made in my life. He ran about 70 yards. He had piled up right on the field edge. He was every bit of 300 pounds, and we drove the truck right to him. 170.5 inch green score on that deer. I might never do this again, but what I can tell you is I took my mindset of I'm a hunter. I don't like to hunt, I'm a hunter. And I took my 60-30-10 principle and I applied it to my desire to harvest my first trophy buck of my life. And in a 9-month period, I succeeded. Anybody in this room can do that. I don't know if you can do it in Washington. I don't know if you can do it in Oregon. I think you can. You just have to choose to do it. You have to pick the tools and go execute them and use them. I've lived it. So are there any questions right now about my mindset or my theory or why I do things? Well, that means I either did a really, really good job explaining it, or you guys are just really, really bored and you're too polite to just get up and walk out of the room. No questions. Wow, that makes me feel weird. Go ahead.
What do you do when your plan and your tactics and everything don't work and it's 4 days of nothing?
Will, that's one of my downfalls as well, because I pick apart everything that I've done. And sometimes that puts you into a tailspin, because sometimes you've done things perfectly right and that deer just isn't there during that time frame. Because what do we, especially whitetail, so blacktail are a different beast, right? They have very different habits than whitetail. Whitetail, they have a cycle or a pattern. And that buck might be there for a day or two prior to you arriving to your hunt, and then he doesn't come back for 3 or 4 days. So you go down to that spot that you've picked, that you've studied, thinking this is going to be it, and maybe you do what I do, or I did, and you go down the first morning under daylight and you do some scouting to verify what you think should be there, and you find it, and you climb up that tree, and for 3 days straight you don't see that buck. It's because he's somewhere else. Now, the other thing that I will say is, if you venture out to have you hunted the Midwest? I highly encourage you to go do so. It's a blast. But they behave a little bit different there because, again, there's so much agriculture. They run those tree lines. That deer that I harvested, 9 days before that, there's a landowner there that sent a photo to my contact in Nebraska. My deer on his property down by the creek 9 days before, 3 miles away. I have a photo of him. I should have thrown it in here. I'll fix that. I can show it to you on the phone. He's down in the creek, and he has great big gashes out of his hide from where he's been fighting. It's a great photo off of a trail cam. 3 miles away. So that's the question that you have to ask yourself. Am I doing something wrong, or am I doing it all right, and that 10% is just punching me straight in the face? Because that 10% is never going to go away. If I had not practiced to the level that I did with my bow in 2022, I would not have taken that shot. 40 yards is a long shot out of a tree saddle through the timber and branches. It's a long shot. The year prior, that's the reason why I did not harvest that 130 class deer, because where that deer came in, I had not practiced with my bow as much as I had in 2021 as I had in 2022, and I didn't have the confidence. And that's key. You can't, if you leave everything to luck, your chances of success are wide, massive. And then it is all luck. Now you are that guy that's driving to hunting camp, talking to your buddy on the phone saying, man, I really hope somebody gets lucky this year. And you spend more time in camp laughing, drinking, and playing cards than you do out hunting. And or you're out wandering around for several days trying to get it figured out, and then you run out of time, rather than putting in all that time and effort ahead of time. That 60% pays off. For me, it's like running a marathon. People always talk about the finish line, and if you've never ran a marathon before, that feeling that you get when you cross the line of a marathon, it's undescribable, because you're part of a very small percentage of mankind that's ran 26.2 miles. It's just, there's not many people that have done it. It's an incredible feeling. But for me, it's the whole process leading up to that moment when you cross that finish line. It's a journey. Thank you. It's a journey. Oh, wrong way. So that is my outlook on the mindset of a successful hunter. Ask yourself, do you like to hunt, or are you a hunter? What's important to you in your hunt? And be good at that and make it successful. And at the end of the day, if you're not good at it, just look good at it. Go get some Sitka, get a really, really nice bow and a nice truck, and at least look like you're good at it. That's another one of my favorite military terms right there. So, folks, I'm Aaron Ritter. I am Limitless Outdoors. This is my website here. I shared my path and my journey of recovery through archery. Last January, I started a grant program that I put archery equipment into the hands of amputees. I pick one amputee every year. Last year was the first year that I did it. I gave a single arm amputee over $5,000 worth of industry-leading archery equipment. And he's starting his journey on his first successful archery hunt. This year I'm doing it again. It is the A3G initiative, the annual amputee archery grant initiative. This is the website. It's that.org. It's my domain. It will take you back to the Limitless Outdoor page, but there is a whole page on there about the A3G initiative. It's a great program. I'm a veteran. It is not veteran specific. This is available to any amputee in the lower 48. The amputee themselves does not have to submit an application for it. If anybody in the room knows an amputee, you can apply on their behalf. And if they're selected this year, I have over $10,000 worth of industry-leading archery equipment that has been donated to me. And this year, I have an all-inclusive whitetail hunt for them down in Texas. And when I say all-inclusive, it's everything. Their travel's paid for, their lodging is paid for, the hunt is paid for, a shoulder mount is paid for, the meat processing is paid for. It's a hunt of a lifetime. It is the hunt of a lifetime. So again, if you know any amputees, please let them know that A3G is something they should probably look into. And then the last thing, I have a podcast. My hunting partner that I met in Nebraska, Sprocket and Chubbs. Check us out if you like podcasts. Let us soak up some of your time on your commute. It's brand new. We have 2 episodes out now. They're great, and there's plenty more to come. Al's a writer out of California, soon to move into Tennessee. He's one of the best human beings I've ever met outside of my own father, and we have a lot of fun on the microphone. So that's it for today. I didn't mean to speak for an entire hour, but I warned you earlier, I get really excited about this, and I love to talk about it. So.